Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. Hey, we're almost in June already. We might have some things to look forward to. This time of year, politics can often get even screwier and crazier than it normally does because we're getting near the end of the sessions. Alberta's legislative session is ending today, so the last final shots the opposition wants to get in are going to come in, and the last bills that the government wants to stuff through, they're going to stuff them through. Federally, we're going to see that thing pretty soon too, and then they'll all settle into their, rubber chicken circuit, as they say, bouncing around pancake breakfasts, ribbon cuttings, and things for the summer or their own vacations. So keep an eye close on the news in this next few weeks. So this is, like I said, when they try to throw a lot of stuff through. Also, you see, when the government wants to drop something really bad sometimes, particularly federally, do it just before summer and hope that over the course of, summer holidays and everything, the public tends to forget it and we'll give them a pass in fall when things all start opening up again. Either way, for the time being, we got a lot to cover. Got a good show today. I got Andrew Lawton. You probably know who he is. He's with True North Media. He has his show, and he's an author of multiple books. And his latest book has come out called Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life. He's in studio, or he's going to be in a little while, and we're going to talk about that book and learn a little more about the man who very possibly could be our next prime minister. It's going to be a good conversation. All right, well, let's get on what's got me going today. And this is a subject that just keeps going on, but it keeps getting worse and worse, and it's worth revisiting, I'm afraid. I mean, right now, Canada, we're facing social and economic challenges on every front. And let's just say it outright. Mass immigration is one of the prime culprits behind it. People try to obfuscate and everything and say, oh, no, but that's just one thing. There's many others. Yes, there are. But the big one right now is mass immigration. We have 1.3 million people entered Canada just in 2023. Let's see, access to housing has hit crisis levels. Healthcare and educational institutions are bursting at the seams. Inflation, it's slamming every type of consumer good. And we've got ethnic-based divisions and conflicts on the rise throughout the country. You don't need to be an economist or a sociologist to realize that, sure, there's no magic bullet to address these challenges, but we can ease the immediate pressures by tapping the brakes on mass immigration. This isn't a matter of selfishness or intolerance, it's logistics. We just can't sustain these numbers. Unfortunately, the Trudeau government has no interest in curbing these immigration levels, much less cutting them. In fact, they keep doubling down. Minister of Immigration Mark Miller, he just announced a plan to quintuple the number of Gazan immigrants coming into Canada. Yeah, 5 times as many. In fact, he's going to say that they could bring the families, so it could be even higher than that. Now, we've got protests and anti-Semitic violence erupting around the nation. Why on earth do we want to import thousands more people from the world's biggest hotbed of violent anti-Jewish hatred? There's several Arab nations right near Gaza that could take in Gazan refugees if they wanted to, where they presumably would be able to culturally integrate more comfortably than they do within Canada. Is it unreasonable to politely ask those nations to step up instead of Canada? The Liberal government is now pushing legislation that's going to allow expats to automatically pass on their citizenship to children, even if the kids have never set foot in Canada. Now, you might remember the Lebanese issue years ago, maybe not, but Canada had a problem with citizens of convenience. They live abroad, but just pop back occasionally to drain the country of healthcare services and other such things. Or if war breaks out, they'll come here and hide, but then they go back. It's something of a parasitic approach to citizenship, and that policy hole was closed years ago, while the Trudeau government wants to open it back up. So just think how easy it'll be to find a doctor. It's so easy already. When the Canadian system is now on the hook to provide free care for thousands and thousands more kids born overseas who've never even been in Canada. And then we've got activists pushing for a misguided open border policy. And they've been openly demanding, not asking, demanding that Canada starts giving permanent resident status to illegal immigrants. Not talking about all immigrants, illegal immigrants. Apparently they don't think the 1.3 million who did legally enter a year are enough. These activists feel emboldened enough through the years of Trudeau's permissive immigration policies that they think they're going to get away with it. We can't dismiss their demands, as ridiculous as they sound. The Liberals might consider acquiescing to them. And just think of the volume and quality of new Canadians that we could gain once word gets out that all they have to do is step foot in the country, whether legally or not, and they'll just get full permanent resident status. It's abundantly clear that the Trudeau Liberals are desperately putting their political well-being ahead of the needs of Canadians. The only positive economic indicator the government can point to right now is growth in the gross GDP. And that's how they can claim the nation hasn't officially hit a recession. The only reason the GDP, though, has been growing is due to mass immigration, which creates activity and causes a housing boom. But the GDP per capita for Canadians has been plummeting due to this. The entire country is getting poorer by the day as more people are splitting an economic pie that isn't growing as fast as the population is. Of even more concern, though, and this is the bigger one, than the Liberal obsession with mass immigration, is the deathly silence from Conservatives on the issue. If there's going to be any relief for Canadians to look forward to from this current terrible policies, it's expected to come from an incoming Conservative government. But if the Conservatives won't even talk about the issue today, will they find the courage to tackle the issue tomorrow? I mean, every elected Conservative politician lives in dread of being called a racist. Critical discussion of immigration issues is sure to draw that label, even if race has nothing to do with it. Thus, I think part of the reluctance on the part of Poilievre's government to talk about it. But I got some bad news for the Conservative Party of Canada, though. They're going to be called racist no matter what they do. The Trudeau government is cornered and desperate. They'll play the race card without basis or hesitation, even when they got a comfortable lead. What makes the CPC think that staying silent on political issues will keep the Liberals from accusing them of racism? Guess what? The Liberals are also going to accuse them of wanting to ban abortion, wanting to roll back marriage rights for LGBTQ people, and wanting to steal candy from babies. That's the bedrock of every contemporary Liberal campaign technique. Don't worry about trying to pressure Liberal MPs to see reason on the immigration issue. They never will. That ship sailed. Citizens, though, must put pressure on the Conservatives on this issue, and the sooner the better. If they keep taking the path of what they see as the least resistance when it comes to immigration, the mass influx of people coming into Canada will continue unabated, even if we change governments. And at the rate it's going to crush this nation for generations to come. Clock's ticking, folks. Again, just, we want to support the Conservatives, but don't be afraid to be critical of them, too. I mean, they can make mistakes as well. And if we don't speak up, they're going to do that. All right, let's see what else is going on out there and check in with our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Well, I'm enjoying the sunshine, Cory, after what seems like weeks of nothing but rain. It's nice to have some sun for a while.
Yeah, I actually mowed the lawn the other day for the first time, this season. It was already getting near knee deep in spots. It's quite a workout when you let it get that long, but
yeah, everybody I know is complaining they haven't been able to cut their grass, and as you say, it's getting knee deep. Anyways, if Nico, the producer, could just put up a photo I sent to him. You tweeted this out a couple days ago, Cory, and I find it absolutely fascinating. Can you just explain what we're looking at here?
Sure, actually, yeah. That fellow on the left, his name is A.W. Stewart. He built on the exact same spot that my house is, a little shack that was given to him. The land was given by Charlie Prittis, the founder of Prittis, where I live, and he had a little general store and post office there, and he lived in it. And that's him with his horse down by the creek, just down towards the end of my property there. So Jane and I were out for a walk, and that was from 1905 or so. And we went to that same spot, and you can tell by the cliff, though it's hard to tell with the black and white and the angle, the water was too high to get down to it, but that same spot hasn't changed too much, except, of course, the trees. They've really grown since then, because back then they used to cut down everything for fence posts and firewood. And now it's all grown, nice big old growth, which is why I get all those crazy critters in my backyard all the time.
Oh, that's very cool, Cory. Yeah, it immediately grabbed my attention when you tweeted it. Very cool.
A tip I would offer to anybody, go to the Glenbow Archives online. There's actually a lot of cool pictures of every neighborhood, parts of Alberta, and it's all public access. It's quite good.
Yep, awesome. Anyways, we've had a really busy morning today, Cory, and lots of weird and wonderful and wacky stories to entertain readers. As you know, yesterday was Menstrual Health Day. Hygiene Day across the world, and the Trudeau Liberals celebrated it in style, all wearing menstrual bracelets and whatnot. And it was met with some scorn, including Laureen Harper, Prime Minister Stephen Harper's wife, and some funny Twitter comments there. Also out of Ottawa, we have a story about an NDP MP breaking down in tears in the Commons as she said climate change is not general neutral. It affects women way more than men. Edmonton City Council has opened up a 3-day hearing on their plans for 15-minute cities, and they're getting tons and tons of feedback there. Controversy in the NDP leadership race where Naheed Nenshi and Sarah Hoffman have been accused of lying about visiting the Midfield Trailer Park in Calgary during the time it was being evicted. So that's a good story there, and looks like Nenshi is sticking by his comments. Charges against PGA star Scottie Scheffler have been dropped. He had to run in with a police officer at the PGA tournament a week or so ago. Fun story of the morning is apparently North Korea is unleashed a literal, can't even say it, feces bomb on the poor people in the south. They're loading up balloons filled with feces and floating them over Seoul and exploding them. So the people of Seoul aren't very happy about that. A couple of Kamloops stories on the unmarked alleged grave sites today. We've got a local indigenous leader saying that the missionaries just took the bodies and disposed of them away from the residential schools, and that's why there'd be nobody's found so far. And City TV in Vancouver had to withdraw a story in which they claimed that there were graves found. And your outrageous federal story of the day, Cory, is you remember they sold all those ventilators for scrap metal. So Access to Information documents show they sold $22,000 ventilators for only $21 so they could, quote, better understand the recycling industry. So you just got to shake your head. That's all you can do.
Yeah, I gotta try and laugh to avoid crying. I mean, that's why I couldn't help but chuckle. As horrific it must be if you were living in Seoul and a balloon full of poop blew up and splattered you and your household. But I guess, hey, if we're gonna have disputes between two neighboring countries, I can think of worse things they lob at each other than balloons full of feces. So maybe if it just sticks to that, it could be worse.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for the update. I'll let you get back to hammering away on that and hopefully less fecal-related matter for the rest of your day.
Thanks, Cory.
All right. Thanks, Dave. That is our news editor, Dave Naylor. And as you can hear, yes, lots of stories breaking all the time, covering things from the light to the serious. And the reason we do it, this is where I do my nag, is because you guys have subscribed. You know, we don't take tax dollars. We don't want to take, we won't take it. We stay independent. And the way we do is because you guys have stepped up and you have subscribed. So get on there, westernstandard.news/subscription, $9.99 a month, $100 for a year, guys. Just like an old newspaper subscription. It's well worth it, and you will get right past that annoying paywall and be able to get straight to all of those important stories. Important stories like that, yeah. Like I said, we could cover the light stuff too. And this is kind of light and heavy mixed at the same time, as Dave mentioned. If you don't punish yourself by going on X and things like that, you might not have noticed it, but the big virtue signaling issue of the day yesterday for Liberal members of Parliament was to walk around with these little bracelets with the red part in the middle, which I guess was to symbolize their unity with people who menstruate. We used to call them women, but now I guess you have to break that down and specify it. Part of what's so frustrating with this sort of stuff from the woke is that, you know, the identity of women themselves, this is supposed to be a virtue signaling exercise in support of women, but these are the same people also who completely undercut women all the time when saying, yes, but as long as that person over there wants to change their personal identity, they can compete in sports, and they're supposed to be considered a woman as well. But guess what, guys? They don't menstruate. Either way, do we really need to discuss it? I don't think there's really been that much oppression of menstruators in North America these days. We understand it's a regular bodily function. It's just what we do. I don't think we tend to shame people for it. I mean, everybody has a lot of bodily functions we don't tend to discuss at length. We don't have to wear bracelets to celebrate them all the time. But this is what our elected officials get up to. Either way, it gives us something lighter to report on. It can't all be Israel and Gaza and the horrific stuff. We could talk about period bracelets now and then for a change as well. All right, but let's get back to the domestic front and speak with our guests. I've really been looking forward to this. We've got in studio author, show host, writer with True North. Boy, a long description. Andrew Lawton in studio, and you've just released yet another book, Andrew. Thanks for coming in to talk to us about it today.
Happy to be here. I'm sorry, I forgot my menstruation bracelet. I didn't know that was the fashion of the day.
I need to get a red Sharpie. You could make one.
Yeah. I could just my Apple Watch. I could just like color over, and it's actually this is my diarrhea bracelet. You said we need to celebrate every bodily function. So
well, I put one on X. If you're familiar with my account, I'm a little tasteless sometimes. I had a candy corn bracelet that I put on. I said for the day of recognition of pooping.
Yeah, there you go.
It got mixed reviews, but well, like I said, we got to laugh now and then. As serious as these issues are, you got to lighten up a little bit. So you wrote on Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life. So a biography kind of Mr. Poilievre up till now. I mean, this is a story that's probably only halfway written.
Yeah, there's always a challenge in writing about something that is so contemporary. So my first book was on the Freedom Convoy, and I wrote it after the convoy had ended. So it was more retrospective. Whereas here, it's a point in time. And likely you could make another book in 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, depending on how the election goes. I am also convinced that it was important to have a documented record of his life to this point, how he got to where he is, which for Canadians who are deciding how to vote for, or Canadians that are just observers of politics, I think can be a really useful tool.
Yeah, well, and finding out who Mr. Poilievre is. I mean, he's an outspoken, extroverted man, yet at the same time, he's very private about himself. You don't get to know a lot about him. We've had him here a couple of times, see where you are for interviews, and a great, fantastic talks about what he wants to do with the party, but you don't get much more else out of him. So, I mean, as an author, it must have been challenging because you want to write a bit about him as well. I mean, the personal aspects. I mean, not getting, exposing or embarrassing, but just like what makes this man tick.
Yeah, no, I would have totally been all on the exposing and embarrassing stuff if I got it. But
there.
No, you're right. And when he talks about his personal life, usually it's in a very curated way to make a point. So he's talked about, the upbringing of his parents, school teachers from Calgary, the adoption he went through. He's talked about his parents having to downsize because of interest rates back a few decades ago. So there are little glimpses of this you get through. But the one thing for me, though, in writing this was that I was talking to a lot of the people around him, and they were a lot looser with their lips than he might have been. So I still think I got a relatively good picture of his life, going back to his youth in Calgary, his adolescence, getting involved in politics, and a little bit of that personal stuff does shine through.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and there's some interesting things with his history. I mean, it's his father came out of the closet late in life. It turns out he was a gay man, and there was a split family. But it sounds like Mr. Poilievre is very well, comfortably reconciled with that. But these are formative things with people on their way growing, and I find some of that more fascinating to know those things, I guess, than just the policy statements that we tend to get.
Yeah, I mean, no one exists in isolation from their experiences and their stories. So even if people know him in a political context, there's still a human experience that has led to that moment. And how much it has led to it, who knows? One example that comes out in the book and has not been reported elsewhere is that his daughter has quite a severe case of autism. And that's something that he as a father has had to grapple with while working in politics. So that's the type of experience that could very easily shape your outlook to certain issues as a parliamentarian.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, it'll give, I guess, more of a direct sense of things when it comes to the challenges parents with kids with special needs have, especially as a parliamentarian. When you're in a job when you're flying and bouncing around with a child that needs a lot of stability and attention, it's a very challenging role, which also shows, I mean, that was a large part of why Mr. Poilievre didn't run in the last leadership, because that was just coming out at that time. But now he's gone for such. He's a driven man. I mean, something that was clear in the book too, though, there's people who did other careers and then fell into politics later, but it sounds like Mr. Poilievre has always had a razor focus on the political life.
Yeah, the subtitle of the book is A Political Life for a reason, because his life has been politics has been his life, and even the people around him have been, I don't want to say unchanged, he certainly met people over the last 20 years, but a lot of the relationships that he forged when he was first getting involved in politics are relationships that are still very valuable to him today. I mean, he interned with people that are now members of parliament with him. He volunteered on campaigns with people who are now working on his campaign. The internship coordinator when he interned for Jason Kenney was Jenny Byrne, that he had a 12-year relationship with and is now his chief advisor. So all of these connections, again, many of which forged right here in Calgary or certainly in Alberta, have really followed him throughout his entire life.
Well, for people who work in politics, I mean, the network is really important. I mean, some come from outside and jump in, but if you're immersed within it, I mean, your social network is there, as saw with Jenny Byrne. It's interesting that he can, it's difficult in life to reconcile that and keep a professional relationship later on, because they're both very entrenched conservative people, whilst, no longer being a couple.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing that came out, and Jenny Byrne did actually speak about her relationship on the record, is that they were friends first and are friends since. That's the way that relationship is framed, and they've always had a tremendous amount of trust for each other. And I think the fact that Pierre Poilievre has now made her the person that really, I don't even think it was a pool of people that auditioned for it. I think it was just a given that she would be the one in the driver's seat on his leadership campaign, and now what he's doing as leader.
Yeah, well, and trust is integral. So as you get to those higher levels, you just really want somebody that you can feel comfortable in speaking with. So he's considered that very important for himself. So being as, I mean, some of it, what you wrote about too, I mean, his early essay that won him a prize, the things that got him in, but is he an ideologue? Would you say that?
Very much so. He's also quite practical, though. And I think that there's this dilemma in politics where you have people that are all about electability and people who are all about, the purity of ideology. And there's often the belief that there's no middle ground. And I think, well, I've never heard of him using it. I think Poilievre really took a cue from the old William F. Buckley Jr. rule of, support the most electable, most conservative candidate. You have to look at that intersection of practicality and pragmatism and of, that philosophical purity. And when you talk about that essay, a lot of what he advocates for has remained unchanged over the last 2 decades. He's always been committed to, classical liberal principles, freedom of speech, the idea of the free market, the idea of getting government out of the way. And a lot of the messaging that he used in that essay, almost identical to what he's campaigning on in the leadership race and since becoming leader.
Yeah, and I mean, it's picking, you don't want to die on an ideological hill because it can be a waste of a party or a campaign or anything. Yeah. Sometimes it's time to back off a bit. Though, I mean, and it's easier for me to do as somebody commenting from the sides to get on their case when they back off on other things. But a frustrating thing that I hit every time, and they didn't like that when he came in, a pet issue of mine, supply management. Drives me bananas. As a conservative, as a classical liberal, it's just is antithetical to the entire ideology. And I've asked him point blank, would you get rid of it? He's been honest. He said, no, he wouldn't. Okay, so he knows that on principle, he doesn't feel it's a good policy. But if you're looking to elect a government across this country, you just don't want to pick a war with Quebec dairy farmers at this time.
Yeah, I mean, and this was the case with Andrew Scheer in 2019 as well. I'm convinced that if you were to be behind closed doors with Andrew Scheer, having a few drinks and just, chatting about politics and policy, he's probably against supply management. But at its core in politics, that's the issue that seems to just be the weird one that convinces everyone to go against their ideological instinct, including people that, by the way, had no tolerance for the wheat board monopoly.
Well, yeah.
But when it comes to the dairy industry, it's a different calculation.
Well, and that's just what I guess as a Western pundit sort of gets a guy a little nervous if you wonder how far does the pragmatism go, because we know the Quebec tail tends to wag the Canadian dog a lot. How far would it get, perhaps, with a prime minister in Poilievre before he might put his foot down with some Quebec demands?
Yeah, well, and there's a little bit of history in the book that I think is quite interesting in that regard. So when Stephen Harper became prime minister in 2006, the Quebec caucus was very influential, and part of that was because they wouldn't stop putting their agenda forward. And Stephen Harper had said what a couple of MPs thought they had to read between the lines on was, when these guys come in here and they make these asks and there's no one on the other side to push back against it, I have limited options. So there was this group that formed within the Conservative caucus, which called themselves the Khmer Bleu, after the Khmer Rouge. And Pierre Poilievre was a member of this. And they were the conservative members of the Conservative caucus. And their goal was to meet every week before the caucus meeting and say, how can we push conservatism within our party? How can we push the government towards a conservative agenda? So I think Poilievre does have a track record of trying to keep the party accountable to the right. Now, the question that raises, will there be a Khmer Bleu in a Poilievre government? Will there be a contingent in that caucus that says, okay, we need to make sure that our conservative principles are not left behind?
Well, there's no doubt, though, that the influences of Prime Minister Harper on him will be very strong and felt. I mean, he cut his teeth in government under Harper's leadership, and I would imagine, hopefully, he's picked the best and worst of that. I mean, there was good and bad to come from the Harper. How would you see him differing from Harper if he became prime minister?
The one area that was raised by a number of people I spoke to is Harper's incrementalism. Now, to give Harper a little bit of a pass on this, he was elected with a minority government. And then he was reelected with a minority government. He didn't get his majority until 5 years later in 2011. But by that time, there had been this commitment to this path of having to build consensus, work across the aisle. So that really aggressive, bold agenda, the radical agenda, didn't really happen. So, I mean, it was funny when the left and the media were accusing Harper of being this radical draconian leader. A lot of conservatives were like, I wish. Where is that Harper? Yeah. So I think Poilievre has learned a little bit from that. And I also think if you look at the poll numbers, he is likely at this point anyway to be entering with a really decisive majority. So he has a latitude that Harper never had in his first term if this pans out. And I think he's going to use it. I don't think he wants to squander that leverage that he'll have. Now, the challenge is, and this I know will be of interest to people in the West, is the Senate. Stephen Harper left 22 vacancies in the Senate when he left office. Those were filled by Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau has had 10 years of appointing senators. Will the Senate become an impediment to Pierre Poilievre's agenda as prime minister? I don't know. It's a possibility, though.
Well, if you get those big standoffs, I mean, the supposedly independent senators of Trudeau.
Yeah, the nonpartisan senators, I think, will very quickly show themselves to be anything but.
Yeah, so, I mean, that could be, I guess, a check that would hold him a bit. Because, as I said, I mean, if the polls hold, he could have a supermajority, unlike anything we've seen since the 80s among conservatives. What do you think, though, then he would take on? I mean, if you've got that opportunity, I mean, we know how the politics works. You're going to hit it hard in the first year or two and then kind of ease off when you're moving towards re-election. So what tough ones do you think he would bite his teeth into in that first year or two if he got that majority?
Well, I mean, look, he's been a very, very strong fiscal hawk. And I know that he's being left a mess by the Liberal government, but he also has to prove that he's making pretty real steps towards balancing the budget. So that's going to be a challenge that he has to take up or show really good progress on. He's got to defund the CBC. Yes. I mean, this is not the number one issue for a lot of people, but it's an important issue and it matters to his base. And he has not left himself any wiggle room to get out of that. So if that doesn't come within the first 100 days, there's something wrong.
Well, if it doesn't come in the first 100 days, I'll be among the people.
Yeah, as will I.
I'm not saying tear him out of office, but hey, get a roll in here. We can't peel that back.
Yeah, you guys will have some new. You can move into the CBC headquarters in Calgary, expand a bit.
Yeah, it would need to be sanitized. we could do so. Well, he's got his work cut out though. What sort of pitfalls? I mean, you see, we got 16 months until the anticipated next election. If Trudeau was really crazy and intransigent, he could actually stretch it for another year beyond that. Some people might not realize that.
Yeah,
they're kind of, I think, in desperation and just hoping that almost the Conservatives trip themselves up. What sort of minefield do you think is ahead of Mr. Poilievre? I mean, it's a dangerous course to hold the power. Some people say you peak too early with the polls, you're really at a risk of a hard fall.
Yeah, there's always the X factor. I mean, not to get all conspiratorial, but a pandemic. I mean, if there's some event like that, some national crisis of sorts that gives Trudeau the opportunity to be the daddy again, to be in the driver's seat, to be the unifying figure that he pretended he was, that's obviously an issue that could harm Conservatives. Although I think that in general, when you look economically at where things are, the deck is stacked against Justin Trudeau. People's mortgages are coming up for renewal. Interest rates are going up. All of the issues we see with cost of living and housing are going to get worse in the next 2 years. So I do think that there is an incentive for Trudeau to, if he goes to the polls now, it's not going to work well for him. So I think that he wants to wait and see if something puts the voters a little bit more in his corner. But again, I have a hard time seeing what that path would be.
Well, that's it. I mean, they're praying for the usual issues. They're throwing it out there, trying to keep abortion.
Yeah, it's going to be abortion and assault rifles. Anytime they're saying abortion and assault rifles, it's because nothing else is working.
There's been too many conservative governments in a row that never acted on abortion. So I think that assault rifle's not loaded. But the Liberals can never be discounted. I mean, they are an established, even if Trudeau might be less than competent in some ways, they got some very strong minds and well-organized people back there. Poilievre's as aware of this as anybody, though.
Yeah, and when you have nothing to lose, I mean, it's the caged animal approach. When you're backed into a corner, to use all the cliches here, that's when people come out swinging and swing for the fences. And look, I'm of the mind that Justin Trudeau is a burn it all down with him kind of guy. I actually don't think he cares what he leaves behind. I think that he will go nasty, he'll go dirty, he'll go low, and if the whole party crumbles, it doesn't really matter to him.
Yeah, and it's, I wrote that in a recent column I ended, it's misattributed to Sun Tzu, but something along the lines of, an unprincipled leader will burn down the nation and rule over the ashes. And Trudeau has a bit of that in him, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But, time will tell. So before I let you go, now today, for those watching live right now, you've got a book kickoff going on in Calgary, an event. Where's that at? What time? Yeah, well, Pierre Poilievre's life started in Calgary, so we thought it was fitting for the book about Pierre Poilievre to launch in Calgary. I love this city. We're going to be at the Ranchman's Club at 4:00. Okay, and just so folks know, we got the Ranchman's Bar that's down on McLeod. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about the Ranchman Club, which is in the outline. But people do get that mixed up. It's a really cool old club, actually. It's really nice. Aside from coming to see your book. I've never been. So, okay. Yeah, and tickets are available at modernmiraclenetwork.org/Lawton. Okay, excellent. And where else can people find your book? Well, everywhere. It's on Amazon, it's on Indigo, and you can always support independent publishing by going to Sutherland House, which is the publisher, and they have it available directly. Excellent. Well, thanks for writing the book and, multiple books. I mean, you've got a few out there. I recommend folks get out there and grab a few copies out there. But this is the latest one with Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life. And thank you for doing it. And I'm sure it'll sell well and people will appreciate your documenting the first half of Pierre Poilievre's life. Anyways, it'll be interesting writing the second half when he's done with politics.
Thanks a lot, Cory.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. So yes, as I said, that was Andrew Lawton. Yeah, the Ranchman Club. It is in the Beltline. It is a neat spot. You can get there for the book launch in person. Meet Andrew. Grab your copy, guys. Get on down there if you're in the Calgary and area office. And of course, if you're not, I mean, search it out. I said that book's available on pretty much every platform. Support local media, support local publishers. Get your copy. It's cool stuff. I mean, we want to know. This is kind of your head start on who the next prime minister might be, and it's looking very likely to be. And I'm kind of interested. We want to look at these things. As I said before, when Poilievre's been on the show a couple of times, he says the right things. He's a smart man. I think he's principled, but he's always very controlled. He's tight. He sticks to what, is careful territory, which is kind of a good and a bad thing. I mean, he's quite different, say, than Premier Danielle Smith. Danielle Smith, I think her greatest strength and her greatest weakness is that she's impulsive. She'll just go with it. She jumps right out there and does things. Sometimes it's for the better. Sometimes she gets herself in the soup. I don't think we're going to see that with Poilievre. He just works so carefully and controlled with things that, it's always going to be planned. Though, I mean, hey, not everything always goes to plan. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the months to come with him. So, a story that's been going for a little bit, and it's something I talk about a lot. We'll kind of turn a little bit here. Dave mentioned it on the news update. It's just everything's coming to a head again. So what was it, on the 27th was the 3-year anniversary of when the anomalies were found at the Kamloops former residential school site. I mean, we've never seen anything like it in the country, the whole nation. I mean, it made international news. The headlines were insane. They were talking about mass graves, mass murders, priests forcing children to go out in the night and bury bodies in an apple orchard. This is how crazy and extreme the rhetoric was getting around this. The Pope himself came over and apologized. Trudeau created a holiday. The flags were kept at half-mast for 6 months. Has never been done in Canadian history. All over this alleged 215, it began with bodies outside of the Kamloops residential school. I got to admit, part of why I'm as grumpy on this issue and stuck on it too, is that at first I fell for it too. When I first read the headlines because the headline said they've found the bodies, the graves of 215 children. I was aghast, like, oh my God, it was way worse than I ever imagined. I mean, I was familiar with residential schools and the issues, but holy cow, this is terrible. I can't imagine it. Let's get on this. Let's get excavating. Let's find the families of these children. Let's find these perpetrators if they're still alive. I mean, the stories that this was apparently happening in the 50s or 60s, they should still be there. Well, it's 3 years later. No bodies. 100 churches in Canada got vandalized. Some burnt right to the ground over this. No bodies. The band was given $8 million almost 3 years ago to investigate this, to follow up on this. No bodies. Why? Because there aren't any. I'm going to come out right and say it. I believe to the core of my soul. I could be wrong. I will admit that I could be wrong. But you know what? There's only one way to prove me wrong at this point. Get a shovel, get out there, dig a hole, and find a body. This is ridiculous. This is absurd. This is such a serious issue. It's been so socially divisive for people. For the people who really do believe that hundreds of children had been murdered and secretly buried in this field, I can't imagine. I can understand the rage of First Nations people or even non-First Nations people if you're believing that story, of course. But now the rage, because it's untrue. I mean, I'm happy that there weren't 200 and some children murdered and buried in there. Absolutely, I'm happy about that. But I'm furious that we swallowed this hoax, hook, line, and sinker, without putting forward the same sort of demands for evidence that we would have with anybody else. I own a little acreage. What if I had gone to the press and the public and said the prior owner of my acreage murdered and buried 50 kids in the trees behind my house? I did a little radar study and I think I found the evidence of all those 50 graves back there. Oh, no police. No investigation, no digging. Just take my word for it. Oh, you're going to give me some millions of dollars to follow up. Okay, 3 years later, I still haven't even dug a hole. Like, that's the analogy of what we going on. The Picton farm, the RCMP went through the dirt to find bones, to get DNA evidence, to find the victims of that monster. Yet, nobody has moved a teaspoon of dirt at the Kamloops site. Why? Because there's no bodies. The myth will be gone. The $8 million, and where did the $8 million go? They haven't spent it excavating. They haven't spent it researching. Where did it go? That's another big question. Thanks to Justin Trudeau, we're not allowed to audit these bands anymore. Did some people on the reserve get some new SUVs, perhaps? Some nicer vacations? I don't know. If you want to end the speculation, show us the books. Show us. You want to end the denialism. The denialism, that's what they call it. That's what started coming out. There was even a Liberal coming up and saying, we should make it illegal for people to criticize any of the given story, the rhetoric on the residential schools. They want to make it illegal to talk about that. So this conversation I'm having right now, if they had it their way, would be even illegal for me to say this. Why? Prove me wrong. If you want to shut down this quote unquote denialism, what better way than having a forensic investigation of this alleged mass grave and say, see, there's the bodies of the children. But you see, the thing is too, that people have been finding is that there was very good record keeping. At these residential schools, even though they were not nice places, there were abuses. So let's not beat around the bush there. It was a failed policy. It was a bad idea. I won't deny any of that. There just wasn't hundreds of children murdered and buried in the orchards. That's what I'm denying. And with those records, when kids died, it was documented because that's how the schools got paid. They had to document the students, how long they were there, and they had to invoice the government to get their bit of money. These kids didn't vanish. And that's the other thing that's missing from this whole equation. Where's the reports of these missing children? Where did they come from? How did they find 215 children and manage to squirrel them away and bury them and not have a single aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister say that these kids vanished? The hypocrisy goes further. We've had noise going on in Winnipeg for a while because it sounds like a sick man who's probably a serial killer. He's in jail. They suspect that he disposed of the bodies of 2 Indigenous women in the Winnipeg garbage dump. Now, to excavate and find bodies in a garbage dump in a city of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, we're talking about a dangerous activity that would take years, assuming the bodies are in there, and cost hundreds of millions. Yet, it looks like their governments could be willing to spend that kind of money and do that. And why? Because they're saying it's so sacred to find the bodies so that they can be returned to the family and properly interred, properly buried. Okay. So why is it you're willing to spend hundreds of millions and overturn an entire garbage dump in Winnipeg because it's so sacred, yet you don't want to move a shovel full of earth in Kamloops, where apparently you have 200 to 215 children buried there, and you actually even know where all the plots are? It stinks. And then some people are starting to realize it, because even the Kamloops band has changed their language. They've been calling it unmarked graves for years now. They've been calling it that. Suddenly their language changed. Now they're calling it anomalies. Anomalies. And they might even say suspected of being graves. That's a big leap, you guys. That's a pretty big leap. Why are you backpedaling? Oh yeah, because there's no bodies. But then we get the other ones, the kooks, the crazed ones. So there was a chief comes forward, and the head of the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations, and he does an interview the other day, says, well, the reason the bodies of the residential school victims may never be found is because they were incinerated. You see, those nasty priests, they built giant crematoriums, and they burned the bodies to ashes, and I guess they must have taken the crematoriums down and hid those too, because nobody can find them. But this guy went on the news and he put out this crap. He's lying. He's lying through his teeth. He's making excuses. The bottom line is because there's no bodies. So now they're making excuses for no bodies. Rather than accepting that there was a hoax, do you really want the truth? They talk about Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The word's right in it. Anybody who really cares about this, you should start with the truth. Instead, they're doubling down on lies. Why? Oh yeah, $8 million to investigate nothing. That's why. And that's just one reserve that got that. This is a money train for a whole lot of people. But this money train isn't just stealing from the taxpayers, it's dividing the country. It's making people feel victimized intergenerationally, even more than they have been, for no good reason but greed on the part of some of these people who want to perpetuate this hoax, this myth. So now he's saying that they were incinerated. But what gets me, if it had been anybody else to say that sort of thing on the news, they would have been called out and say, wait a minute, where did you get that from? Show me some evidence, back that up. What are you doing? But because this was a First Nations chief, nah, they just ran it and let it go. Let him spread his baloney, and very divisive, dangerous baloney, without calling him out. I'm calling him out on it. He's not going to come on my show. But I mean, it's just ridiculous. So even if they were somehow incinerated, then what's with the anomalies? Are there graves or not? And again, we don't know because nobody will dig them. He also said that we don't know the exact number of victims because of lack of proper record keeping. Again, that's a lie. The records are actually quite clear. They're out there. They're all over the place. And, it just doesn't stop you guys. But we've got to call it out, and we've got to get courageous politicians and media start calling it out. We got to question the lies. We got to call them liars when they're lying. I don't care if they happen to be First Nations liars. A lie is a lie. It doesn't matter. City News, a mainstream, and you'll find this on, the Western Standard.news. We covered it, yeah. Because City News Vancouver put out a tweet with a headline saying this is the anniversary of the 215 unmarked graves. That was the term they used, the language. This is a mainstream media network. No. There's no graves. If it's not a body inside it, it's not a grave. Even the Kamloops band is now saying anomalies, at least, but not City News. But they got stung pretty hard when they put it out there. As you say, City News quietly backpedaling on the unmarked graves thing because people just roasted them. People have had enough. And you know something that's pretty interesting because, as I said, it was probably 2 or 3 months into the whole thing years ago when I finally started questioning it. Like I said, at first I fell for it a bit. Sure, I thought this really happened. And then as we start seeing more and more evidence, this is starting to stink. By the time I got to maybe a year ago, I was like, nah, there's no bodies in there. But I used to get lots of pushback on social media online when I'd write columns about that, or when I'd talk on my show about that, or when I'd tweet about that. People would get furious with me, of course, and they would attack me and they would swing at me. But you know what? I've been ripping into this for the last 3 days online, and sure, there's always a handful of kooks coming after me. But for the most part, the usual suspects, the left, the rest in the past, silence. They disappeared. Derek, we were talking about that earlier in the office. It's like the Homer Simpson thing where he just kind of slides back in the hedge. Even left-wing activists are kind of realizing now, ooh, geez, guess there weren't bodies. So they're kind of distancing themselves, getting themselves out of there. City News overstepped. They won't do that again anytime soon. But I don't want this to be something we just quietly don't talk about anymore and sink back into the bush. I want this exposed. I want the fraud exposed. Even if it was not purposeful fraud, it was fraud. The person who did this ground penetrating radar study was an activist. She saw what she wanted to see out of the anomalies. It doesn't mean she wanted to create a hoax, but either way, her blinded ideological push did create the hoax. I want to find out who is blocking the further investigation of this hoax. How and why are they stopping the excavation of these alleged graves? By the way, there's been other spots where they did dig, not at Kamloops. That's a large part of the reason they don't want to dig in Kamloops too. Got to admit it. Up in Edmonton, an old hospital site, GPR, they were confident there were buried native remains because there was, oral history. Yeah, it's always that oral history. Said they were down there. So this company that wanted to develop, so they hired native elders. They were there with the sweetgrass smoke and the chanting and the whole works while they carefully excavated so they could find these remains. And guess what? 31 different spots, no bodies. Manitoba, church basement, similar situation. Stories and stories and stories of priests burying bodies in the basement. Oh my God. And GPR found anomalies. So, oh boy, we'll better get in there. And they get the elders and the religious people in and get ready and they excavated. And guess what? Nothing there. So yeah, you can see why I suspect some of the people in Kamloops in the positions of authority in the band don't really actually want to dig. But where'd the $8 million go? I mean, this is a slap in the face to the people who are living in poverty on the reserves, to the people that do have social challenges on the reserves that could have used that money for a heck of a lot of other things then. But I don't think it was spent on any of those, but it wasn't spent. And that's what it was earmarked for, of course, was to find out what was buried on this reserve, if anything. And it wasn't used for that. Why isn't there follow-up? If this was done by anybody else, if this was somebody with a private consulting business, oh, wait, they did do that with the ArriveCan app. Yeah, this is done in other areas, but at least there is some investigation. They're trying. You know, they won't even question the Kamloops ban. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if they toss them more money after this. Because if you can keep this hoax going, this is a government that just prefers to throw money at things rather than take them on for real. Problematic. The story is not going away. I'm not going to let it go away until we get answers on this. And there's others. There's more voices that are starting to speak up on this now, even if others are just going silent. But at least they're not continuing to claim this ridiculous hoax that 200 children were murdered and buried at the Kamloops site. Speaking of hoaxes, here's another fun one. We'll see. This one I might eat my words with yet. But some people got mad at me because I said the drought was over. And in fact, a hydrologist came on the radio the other day and said the drought was over in southern Alberta anyway. And I showed the Weather Network was predicting in January, we're going to be in for hot, dry summer. The drought's going to just be terrible and Calgary is going to be like a desert and, oh, it's over and the reservoirs are full and everything else. Well, the Weather Network is still doubling down, predicting now, though, it's going to be above normal temperatures, hot, dry all summer. So let's see how it looks by September. I hope they're wrong, but I don't know. I think they're guessing. If it's more than 2 or 3 weeks out, it's just a guess. All right. Either way, that's the time I've got for today, guys. Like I said, remember, don't forget to get out there, get Andrew Lawton's book. It'll be a great read and tell you a lot more about Mr. Poilievre. Be sure to get your subscription to the Western Standard.news/subscription. This is how we keep rolling. We really appreciate it if you've already subscribed. And yeah, keep tuning in. The pipeline is going to be on a little later tonight. We'll cover a few more of those issues, and tune in again next week at this time, and we'll have another great conversation. Thanks. See you then.